Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of XYPN Radio. Today, we're actually going to do things just a little bit differently. We're going to mix things up. If you've been listening regularly up until now, you've heard that pretty much only been doing interviews with planners and experts in the field. But today I want to take the opportunity to actually co-host an episode. So you're going to hear more from me today than you normally do. Michael Kitces and I are talking today about the crisis of differentiation and the niche imperative. Now, I know way too many buzzwords, but Michael named it and that's his thing. But it really is important stuff. And it really comes down to, is your firm actually different from other financial planning firms out there? And if so, are you properly communicating those differences to prospective clients and to centers of influence? And honestly, if you think having a niche doesn't matter, I think this episode might convince you to take a hard look at that belief. We both give our sometimes conflicting views on why having a niche is so important. And later in the episode, I actually share some of the mistakes that I made when I launched my own firm, Serenity Financial Consulting, that I hope I can help you avoid. As always, you can check out the show notes at xyplannetwork.com/11. Now, this month's shows are brought to you by New Planner Recruiting, which is the leading recruiting firm integrating new financial planners into unique and exciting growth opportunities with firms nationwide. You can check them out at www.newplannerrecruiting.com, and you can also go listen to our interview with their co-founder, Caleb Brown, at xyplannetwork.com/9. So without further ado, here is my episode with Michael Kitces. All right, so we are here. This is Alan Moore, and we are here with Michael Kitces, our co-host for the day. Michael, thank you for joining us again.
Good to be back.
So Michael, as you may remember, was in our first episode that was launched just a few weeks ago. And so if you didn't hear that, you can go to xyplannetwork.com/1, and you'll actually get all of Michael's backstory. So we're talking today about the crisis of differentiation and the niche imperative, which sounds really fancy. It's a lot of buzzwords. So Michael, tell us a little bit about just what you think of whenever you hear, or when you say, I guess, crisis of differentiation and niche imperative.
Yeah, I can envision like this will be a glorious episode title that goes out everywhere. The crisis of differentiation, the niche imperative. So to me, this is kind of two items, a problem and a solution. So the problem is what I've started calling over the past few years, the crisis of differentiation. So I think we collectively as advisors are kind of going through this now, this crisis of differentiation, this phenomenon that comprehensive financial planning is actually becoming so popular and so successful for advisors that it's actually no longer effective to say that you're a comprehensive financial planner as a way to market and hold out your services. You know, there was a point 10 plus years ago where that really truly was actually unique. Like if we looked at broad-based statistics by the late 90s, there were 300 to 350,000 people out there who said they were financial advisors. Fewer than 1 in 10 of those actually had CFP certification. And it was actually kind of hard to find someone who was serious about doing comprehensive financial planning. Now the number of advisors has fallen by 10 or 20%. The number of CFP certificates has more than doubled since then. And now we're into this environment where saying I deliver comprehensive financial planning, which means I deliver personalized, customized financial plans for my individual clients based on their needs and goals and what they hope to achieve using my CFP certification and my years of experience as a financial advisor. Like that pitch that used to be really unique as to like, oh, there are only people who sell products, but like this person's a comprehensive financial planner. That's just not unique anymore. Like you go out there to websites and we all put this on our website, the same differentiator. I'm a CFP certificate and I've got experience and I deliver customized, individualized personal financial plans. And it's just not differentiated anymore. I think particularly as consumers get savvier about what they're doing. And it's not just, hey, someone introduced me to you and you seem like you're a decent comprehensive financial planner. Tell me more about your services. They're going online, they're researching, they might get referred to you, but they're going to check you out online. Then they're going to check out 2 or 3 other people as well, because it's easy to do a Google search and look at a bunch. And suddenly consumers realize, like, and they all basically say the same thing. They've got the same picture of the lighthouse and the Adirondack chairs and the walks on the beach, and they all say the same thing about delivering comprehensive planning as an experienced advisor. And I think people throw up their hands up in the air and like, I don't actually know who to pick.
The history of comprehensive financial planning, I mean, we're really not that old of a profession in financial planning in general, much less when you start just focusing on comprehensive financial planning. I'm trying to remember when I've seen the number of when, like, the first year a plan was written, and it was like the 50s or the 60s, right? So, but the thing is, really, that has been a differentiator for decades, particularly within the fee-only advisory community. Being fee-only, being a fiduciary, doing comprehensive financial planning, having the CFP certification, that really differentiated you for a long time. And I think we can all agree that financial planning tends to move at glacial speeds. And so the last decade, as you're mentioning, it's kind of started to catch up with us, that all of a sudden everyone's starting to look alike, and yet no one is really acknowledging it. And you're focusing on the kind of the comprehensive financial planning side, and I think we could expand that out, just like you're doing with the website and that sort of thing. Is when we start looking at one firm versus another, trying to figure out the differences is almost impossible. They look the exact same. Yeah. They sound the exact same. It's fun at conferences to talk to advisors and say, hey, tell me about your firm. What do you do? And they say, well, I do comprehensive financial planning for individuals and families, and we have $1 million asset minimums, and we're fee only. And it's like, oh, okay, but so what? Like, what else? What else is out there? What else are you doing?
Well, and like, I feel like those of us who are doing comprehensive planning, we're describing ourselves, like, truly, we're describing ourselves as though our primary competition are insurance agents and stockbrokers and people that just sell one particular product to one trick pony. And you're saying, no, I'm comprehensive and I'm goal centric and I put your needs first and I have a CFP and all these things. And that's just not actually who you're competing against these days. Increasingly, you're actually competing against other people like you. And I hate envisioning this world where, like, all CFPs have to hate other CFPs because we're envisioning that we're in this cutthroat competition for each other. I don't think that's quite the accurate reflection. But when you get down to like a reasonably savvy, affluent consumer who's doing a little bit of due diligence homework, at least before they decide who to give their life savings to, you read anything in the media, they're steering people towards comprehensive planners and CFPs who have the credentials and are willing to act as fiduciaries and all those pieces. And suddenly all those items on which so many financial planners hung their hat as differentiators just aren't differentiated anymore, particularly for the increasingly savvy people they're trying to reach.
Yeah, and I would also add to that argument, though, that I've never really felt like we were competing against other advisors for clients. We were really competing against the clients not understanding the value proposition. And so our value proposition was comprehensive financial planning. Well, now all of a sudden they're hearing that value proposition from multiple firms. So we're still certainly competing against just not hiring an advisor at all. I don't know how many consumers are out there that are just like actively seeking it or going to find somebody that's going to do great work. I think a lot of times we kind of trip over clients and convince them of our services and kind of the value that we provide. But
I mean, I do think that's true. It's worth noting, like, notwithstanding the comments about us being in competition against each other in this context, like, there's no question that the greatest thing most of us still collectively compete against is client inertia. Is just the do nothing versus take the trouble to hire an advisor and pay some dollars and get some work done. But frankly, even in that context, when it's a high stakes decision, like who are you going to hire and pay all this money to and entrust your life savings to, that's put yourself in the consumer's perspective, that's a stressful decision. So if I'm trying to make a stressful decision and then I go out there and try to find someone and I can't tell any of them apart and I'm not certain who to choose, it now makes the inertia do nothing decision even easier because there's no clear choice. There's no clear leader. There's no clear, like, oh, this person's the one for me because they're dedicated and specialize in people just like me. They just get stuck in, I can't even tell how you're supposed to pick someone, so I'm just going to pick no one.
Yeah, and I think it as advisors, we forget just how big of a decision it is to hire a financial planner. I mean, I've kind of always said that, when a consumer or a client hires a financial planner, they are committing to getting naked financially in front of someone. I mean, money is kind of the last cultural taboo that we have in our culture. And so asking someone to hire a financial planner is a huge ask. They're going to come in and tell us their deepest and darkest secrets that have to do with their money and their dreams and their hopes and their goals. We're going to hear things that their spouse has never heard, that their kids don't know, that their parents don't know, their best friend doesn't know. And so we make it very hard on them to kind of do that. I mean, that's hard enough, much, with the right advisor, much less trying to go through this process of finding the right advisor. Even simple stuff like pricing. I remember you, this has been years ago probably 2 years ago, that you were trying to help find an advisor for one of your friends and couldn't find anybody that even put pricing on their website to show how they were different.
No pricing, no minimums. I think people don't even realize, again, the advisor's perspective are oh, well, I just want to get in front of every possible prospect and then I'll explain to them what I cost after I find out their situation. It's very advisor centric. It's very me centric. From the consumer's perspective, or worse, from the referrer's perspective, I don't want to be the asshole that refers my friend to someone only to have them rejected to their face because the advisor's oh, well, I've vetted you and deemed you not worthy, which is what we try to do as advisors because we want to make it all about us. But not only does that put the client in a bad position, it puts the referrer in a bad position. That we're just so wrapped around this idea of we want to take everyone in and evaluate them, rather than being clear about where we're differentiated and who we serve and who we don't serve, and putting that out there so that people can comfortably approach us and know up front whether they qualify or don't. And frankly, I think we even underestimate how many prospective clients we lose because we make that so awkward. It's I want to be in the position to dump every client, to be the one that breaks up with them. And that kind of makes people not want to hang out with you. Right? Put that in the dating context. Oh yeah, I never ask anyone out. I always make them ask me out, and then I decide if I'm going to reject them. Imagine how that would really work in the dating scene. And then imagine how well it's probably working for you as an advisor. That's how we set it up. It's terrible. It drives me nuts. And literally, I won't refer to those people. I won't refer out to them.
Yeah, making it easier for people to refer to you is such a big topic of conversation. But really with this kind of crisis of differentiation, we're talking about, are you actually different? And then are you telling people how you're different? So I think we could probably start with, are you actually different? Is your firm actually we serve and provide comprehensive financial planning to individuals and families that have at least $1 million or more, whether you actually put that on your website or not. Basically, we only work with high net worth individuals. Is that really all you offer? I mean, what are ways that advisors can be different? I mean, I guess that's probably a place to start.
Well, so to me, we get so stuck because we all try to be generalists and then try to figure out how to be different as a generalist. And the answer is, you can't be different as a generalist. That's the problem with being a generalist.
I mean, that's the definition of generalist, is that you're not a specialist.
Yeah, so people are oh, well, how do you differentiate? It's oh, well, I got extra good service. Oh, well, that's good because the last 3 firms I said told me how they have really crappy service. So you're clearly differentiated by having good service. They put it right on their website. Our service sucks, but at least we're cheap, right? Nobody puts that, nobody markets themselves this way. So things oh, I give better service than everybody else is a meaningless differentiator. And because we're doing everything for everyone, then we're trying to figure out how to not alienate anyone. We nobody can come up with what does it look like to be differentiated? So the contrast, let's go to the other end of the extreme. What is a practice that's truly differentiated? Okay, so there's an advisor I know. He works primarily with doctors that are coming out of residency and getting their first jobs as doctors. So focal points for him include everything from, he knows how to actually help you properly negotiate salary and compensation deals with hospitals when you come out, because he knows exactly what those deals look like and who cuts what kind of deals and so forth. He goes really deep into how to sort out student loan, student debt problems, because you come out with a mountain load of it when you're a doctor coming out of the back end of residency. He even knows how to kind of set up meetings and get it done, because residents work crazy hours. So he does meetings with them in the lounges, in the hospitals, because that's when they've got time, and he knows how to talk the talk and the lingo like when you have breaks and when your time's available. And so he goes through these kinds of really focused, in-depth conversations in a manner that most advisors just wouldn't have any idea. Like, hey, you say you do comprehensive financial planning, so tell me how much you know about how to negotiate the buy-in on a physician's practice after you finish your residency, and whether it's a better deal to do a buy-in for a private practice or work at a major hospital. And the average advisor is like, I have no idea, right? Like, how would you know?
Right. Because you work with everybody. So how would you know that specific of a situation?
So, if I'm the advisor that comes in like this guy and says, oh, well, actually I specialize in residents. I've worked with every resident who's come through this program for the past 6 years and helped them all get placed out to great jobs in the area and negotiate good deals. And, 70% of them have already worked off all their student loan debt because I figured out how to structure it that was in a way that was best for them and tie it into the family budget as their salary went up while they got their first physician's jobs. And then 3 of them have actually completely taken over the practice of the physician's practice they were buying into because I know how to facilitate all of that. Like, there's not even a question. Like, do you talk to, oh, well, I do comprehensive financial planning for everyone, or do you talk to like specialist doctor dude? If you're the resident coming out and trying to figure out how to navigate first job plus $200,000 of debt, like there's no one else to call. You go to this person. Like, that's the nature of what deep differentiation and specialization really means. Like, the average advisor goes to hang out in that residence lounge, they're just going to look at him and say, what the hell are you doing here, dude? Like, you don't belong here. When this guy goes in, it's like, oh, Jim, great to see you. Like, how's everything going? Because they know him, because he's part of that community, because he's worked his way into that community, and he knows everything that they need to deal with outside of the generic domain of financial planning.
Because one of the pieces I think is really important, that whenever you are a generalist and you're being compared to other generalists and people can't tell you apart, the only differentiation factor is price. And I think we can all agree that we do not want to be in the business of just competing on price, because it's not a good indicator of, what our knowledge base is and what we want to do. That's not a business that we want to be in. So there's always going to be generalists out there that are competing for price. And we could talk a little bit about how the robo-advisors may have some influence here as well. But if we take this to your own personal situation, if you get the sniffles or whatnot, yeah, you go to a general practitioner, that's fine. But when you've got a real issue, you find out you've got cancer, you don't go to the general practitioner down the road. You go to an oncologist. You don't just go to an oncologist. You go to an oncologist that has dealt with folks with your type of cancer and your type of situation, and you can travel across the country to go find that specialist. So why, as advisors, do we expect to be, we want to be oncologists. We want to be that highly specialized. We have the knowledge in many ways. And yet we're kind of advertising ourselves as the general practitioner, which is just so confusing for consumers.
Well, I hate to say it, or maybe I don't hate to say it. Like, we do it out of desperation. We do it with what I think is a completely mistaken mental philosophy of like marketing, growing a business that says, if I really want to make sure I catch the most fish, I need to throw the biggest net. And the reality is, if you like envision in your mind a net, like a fish net, the further you stretch the net, the wider it may be, but the bigger the holes get in the net. And what ends up happening when you stretch a net really, really wide, a whole lot of fish hit your net and all of them swim straight through. And that's the problem that we create for ourselves. And then I find for most advisors, like, we then make it worse. So we cast a big net, we see a bunch of prospects. Not many of them are becoming clients because, hey, we all say it's hard to get clients. So we go out and meet a lot of people. So like, I know I'm not getting enough clients yet. I've got to cast the net bigger so I can get more prospects in the door, so I can have more chance to get clients. And what ends up happening, you see twice as many prospects. You get even fewer clients out of it. Your close rates go down because you're making yourself less and less and less differentiated. And I talk to so many advisors out there that are seeing all these prospects, and they're really struggling to get people to close and say yes. And they don't even track the numbers, but if I usually push them on, it's like they've got 10 and 20% close rates. It's like 1 out of every 5 to 10 people they see are becoming clients. And that's your first hint right there. If you can't close more than 1 out of every 5 to 10 prospects that you meet, your problem is you're meeting too many different types of prospects that don't fit you. And when I say 1 out of every 5 to 10, every single person you spend even a minute with talking to as a prospect counts in this. So like you meet with them and then you find out 5 minutes conversation that, they don't even have enough money to work with you. Great. That's part of the problem. How much time did you spend scheduling that phone call and setting it up and putting mental energy into it and not doing something else because you had to waste your time with a prospect that was never going to be a chance to fit with you in the first place? Why did they meet with you anyways? Because you won't put your stupid minimums and pricing on your website. So you had to find out the hard way that you can't work with them. Like when you really fairly look at how much time you spend talking to people that you can't do business with or pitching them, but having them not choose to do business with you. Like I find for most advisors, if you really drill down on that, their close ratios are maybe 10 or 20%. And if that's your situation, like that's your first problem, look in the mirror and admit it right now. Like that's a problem. And it's not a problem because you need to go to another sales training class to learn how to better close them and get up to 22%. It's because you're not clearly differentiated enough that they walk in and just immediately say, oh, clearly you're the right one for me. Like, I know you and I talk about this all the time, Alan, when we get people coming to XYPN Network, because, we work so hard to make that a clear niche. And, you get people are contact you. They're like, okay, I'm basically already sold because I've read your website and I love all your stuff. I just have a few questions. And as long as you don't screw up the answers, I'm going to join your network. And like, that's what niche business looks like. People find it, identify with it, relate to it, self-select themselves in, and you end up closing 50, 60, 70, 80% of the people that you're talking because they've already narrowed themselves down and qualified themselves for you.
And I would assume the close rate's going to be different depending on the niche market and depending on the advisor and things like that. But my goal has always been in the 60 to 70% close rate, because if I was any lower than that, the net was too wide. If I was any higher than that, particularly in an advisory firm, it meant I probably had too many service offerings and was trying to cater something to work with essentially everybody. And I saw this more in the context of working hourly, that you could literally work with anyone that came in the door. And so you just find a way to work with them,
Yeah. Well, and frankly, the other caveat to it, and I want to come back to that in a moment, but frankly, the other caveat to it, like if you get too far above like 75% close ratios, frankly, you're probably underpriced. Like that's
very true.
Even when you're really clearly differentiated and really clearly focused, and you're pretty clear about your minimums and your price and what you do, there should still be some natural tension where people are like, all right, I'm really interested, but it's a lot of money, whatever that means to them. But I really think the value is there. Like if you're closing 95% of the people, you're just underpriced. You gotta raise your pricing up.
I'll give Cheryl Garrett a quick shout out. She told me whenever I first started my practice that you knew the pricing was correct whenever you were just a little bit uncomfortable telling your client what your pricing was. Now, that was in the context of hourly, but it was like, when you first start and you're like, I'm $100 an hour, and you feel so stressed about it. And then all of a sudden, eventually you're just like, it's $100 an hour. Ugh. It's like, okay, that's when you got to raise your pricing. So if anybody's out there looking for pricing recommendations, it's when you're just a little bit uncomfortable telling that prospect what you charge, because you're not quite sure that it's going to fit for them.
Yeah. Now, so one other thing I want to come back to on that around, so this concept of like pricing and as a business, what you generate on a client, because you made a comment about, the breadth of service offering and serving lots of different people. So to me, the importance of niche actually comes down to kind of two overlapping factors. The first is the more clearly differentiated you are, the easier it is to get people in, the easier it is to close them. You can price higher and higher over time because your service is so clearly unique and differentiated that it means you're not competing on price anymore. You're competing on differentiated value, which ultimately lets you price higher and more specific as a business, and frankly get more efficient because you're doing, the guy who works with the resident doctors doesn't have to do a minute of research about how student loans work for doctors or how buy-ins work for physicians' practices because he's helped 100 of them already. Like it's second nature to him. So you get much more efficient and you get some time savings out of it as well. But the other concept that I want to note in this category is lifetime client value. So I hear a lot of people that are afraid to go into niches for sort of this idea of like, if I go into a niche, does that mean I have to say no to everybody who's not in my niche? And my answer to that is, if you're really trying to build a good business for yourself, you should want to say no to everybody who's not in your niche. And here's why. Because when you're clearly focused in on a niche, every client that you work with is frankly not just one that you could probably over time charge more and get better value out of because you're more efficient serving them since you know the niche, and you can price higher because you're unique and differentiated. But every person you work with in your niche has a multiplier effect. And the multiplier effect is how much more you learn about the niche, get deeper into the niche, evolve your service model in the niche, and get deeper with your networking and relationships into the niche. So every person I work with in my niche is not just someone who I can serve within my niche. It's also 5 more people I can get introduced to in that niche and go even deeper in what already is my highest value service offering in that niche. When I take someone outside of my niche, like it's a quick one-shot hit and then that's that. I'm not going to get much leverage out of it. They're not going to refer me well because if they're not in my niche, then they're not likely to refer more people in the niche since they're already outside of it. And it's less efficient for me. And I've spent more time on them because now I actually have to do some research as the advisor to get up to speed on whatever their questions are because I don't know that much about their situation because my specialty is that other niche over there. And so there's this effect of like, yeah, if you're serving people in a niche and someone comes along and is like, I just really want your advice and I'll pay you $200 an hour, don't care. Not useful because $200 an hour from you is $200 an hour. $150 an hour in my niche is actually the equivalent of $500 an hour when I count out all the multiplier effects of going deeper into my niche, evolving my practice, going further there, making new relationships, the referrals that can come from that, and everything else. So frankly, if you look at it from the perspective of what's the lifetime value of a client, the lifetime value of a client in your niche is exponentially higher than one outside of your niche. So why would you take low value clients, even if the short-term cash may be higher? Why would you take lower return long-term clients? It's just that's not a good way to build a business.
I totally agree. And I know that some of our listeners are looking at this and they probably are just launching a business or looking at launching a business. And I know what they're saying. That's great that lifetime value is higher, but I've got to be around long enough for that lifetime value to kick in, right? And so one of the recommendations that I make, and then I did in my own business, was I kind of had 2 service models. I had an ongoing service model and a one-time project-based service model. And I always said, I'm going to reserve my retainer slots, my ongoing relationships for my niche. And I'm going to give away those projects. I'm going to do projects for people outside my niche, even though it's not a great business tool, because ultimately that brings in some immediate revenue and ensures that I'm here long enough to make it. So if you're kind of on the fence on this, like, yeah, but I really need the cash or I'm not quite there, you can structure your business model and your service structure in a way that allows you to kind of hit on 90% of what we're talking about and encouraging you to do when it comes to a niche, while also bringing in some of that short one-time revenue if you need it.
Yeah, although, all right, so I'm even going to push back on you a little bit there. I still hear scenarios like that. And I hear the same thing from new advisors coming in, but it still raised the question to me of like, okay, but how much time are you going to spend doing that you could have spent getting deeper into your niche, networking, going to new meetings, going to conferences, finding a way to write for a publication in your niche, reaching out to meet influencers in your niche? Like I find for a huge number of advisors, that approach, not saying you did it, Alan, but like that, what I'm getting to in a moment, like they do it because it's a convenient excuse to hold back from really going after the niche.
I see what you're saying.
It's an easy, you could really focus in on this, or you could kind of half-ass it and take other clients on the side. And it feels easier to half-ass on it than really commit into the niche. And it slows them down. I mean, to me, if you've launched a business and from day one, you have to be knowingly unfocused about it because you're so desperate to get clients in that you will lose focus on your business from day one and go anywhere, then take a step back, build up a little more savings, stay in your own job longer so that when you launch your business, you can do it right and focus in to where you're really trying to go in the first place, because anything else you do, just you're setting yourself up for losing the momentum. And what I see over and over again for niche practices and niche businesses, because of that lifetime multiplier effect, what ends up happening is, in the first years, you get revenue, and then you get 2x revenue, and then you get 3x revenue, and then you get 4x revenue as you build incrementally and linearly. And what happens when you do a niche practice? It goes 1, 2, 5, 10x revenue because the multiplier effects start coming in. So you end out sacrificing exponentially more business growth in years 3 and 4 because you didn't have enough reserves to get through the first 6 months. So if that's your scenario, go get more reserves first and then come in and do your niche and do your business right. Because otherwise you end up half-assing it. And I think for a lot of advisors, like they get themselves into trouble with this and they're struggling by year 2 and 3 and the thing isn't growing as fast as they wanted. And the reason is because they didn't actually focus. And this is where the no, I'm just going to do a lot of side stuff starts to come back and bite them. And I'm not quite the extremist down to the point where like, hey, there's only so much time I can actually spend plowing into my niche and I got some spare time in my schedule and someone just like handed me a client on a silver platter that just desperately wants my advice and will give me a couple $100 an hour. Like, okay, you can take the things that just literally fall in your lap to help bridge the revenue gap and get signed up for places like NAPFA that give some lead generation to help support that. But like if you're spending any outbound time and energy on that, or you're getting soft in the messaging on your website about who you do work with because you're trying to keep the door open for everybody else, you're handicapping the intermediate to long term of your business for a very short term hit that's just going to hurt the business in the long run.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit, I made every single mistake that you were talking about right now when I launched my RA, Serenity Financial Consulting, back in 2012. Literally every single mistake. I remember my first About Me page literally said, works with individuals and families. I mean, I was that guy. I was the non-niche marketer that we're talking about because I was in a position I didn't have enough savings when I launched my firm.
The ultimate differentiation, like
literally
thank
everyone.
God, because like I'm an individual human being, and this guy works with people like me because no other advisor I've seen works with individuals and families.
Exactly. Well, and you have to say families as well so that they understand you work with couples in addition to just individuals.
Yes, because heaven forbid your website is too narrow and implying that you only work with single people and that a married couple might walk away.
No, and I was in that position where I didn't have enough money when I launched my business that I felt comfortable turning business away. And so I went very broad. The other mistake that I made was when I did kind of select a niche and thought that it's who I wanted to work with. And it was divorcing couples. I went out and got my CDFA and realized after just working with a couple of clients in that niche, that was really crappy, stressful work that I did not want to be doing. And so I was
each their own.
And there's some people that specialize in those folks, and that is awesome. We need them, but like that was not for me. And so part of it too was like not really understanding who I wanted to work with and almost not being able to decide because there were a couple different folks. So, a couple different client profiles that I thought I wanted to work with, wasn't quite sure. So I did get the advice one time from Kristen Harrod, who was a financial planner, had V2V Financial. She worked with new parents, kind of turned coach for financial advisors around niche marketing. She told me one time, she said, Alan, I want you to just close your eyes and imagine the perfect client walks in your door. I mean, they are perfect. You will do anything to work with them because they just fit exactly what you want to be doing. What are their needs? What do they need from you? Is it a certain age? Is it a life transition? Is it a profession? Is it a certain set of complexities that you understand that most advisors don't? What is it about them? And really define it. In marketing, we call it your avatar. It's who's the person that you're really marketing to. And I don't think advisors really do that. I don't think sometimes we're like, oh, I want to work with young professionals. That's like half of America. I mean, really, when we define young professional.
Well, and I'm going to tease her a moment only because I adore her so much. So like Sophia Berra, very successful planner working with young folks. Literally the name of her firm is Gen Y Planning. You search for Gen Y Planning. She comes up number one. And, maybe this is a sad statement on how undifferentiated advisors are. It's like Sophia specializes in the largest generation in the history of our country with like 80 something million people. And that's actually a valid niche because so many other advisors, right? Like that, so many other advisors are undifferentiated and say they work with everyone. That merely narrowing it down to 80 million people is actually a differentiated niche.
And so if you haven't listened to that episode, xyplannetwork.com/3, we had Sophia on kind of telling her backstory. So you can go hear about her firm.
Sophia, I love you in your practice, but it is comical that you get to specialize in 80 million people.
It's like advisors that say we specialize in women. Like that's over 50% of the population. That's not a niche. That's like a giant net.
Yeah. Although again, like it sort of is only because when like 98% of advisors are undifferentiated, you can actually specialize in 50.1% of the population. But yeah, like ideally we should really be a little more focused than this.
It's true. So like if more advisors were willing to define their niche, then I work with women, I work with couples, I work with Gen Y, would no longer be a differentiator. But as of today, it is, because if you Google financial planner for millennials, financial planner for Gen Y, Sophia's #1 in Google search. And so that's actually, she actually gets a lot of business from Google that way because she's the one that pops up. But if there were hundreds of advisors, then it would kind of force a different direction. I've been joking with her ever since we launched the XY Planning Network that ultimately my goal with XYPN was that we would have so many advisors serving Gen X and Gen Y clients that she would be forced to choose a niche. And now, actually, in the episode, she talks a little bit about this. She actually has a niche that she's kind of discovered within Gen Y. She works with a lot of first generation and a lot of world travelers. It's just kind of the personality that she really attracts. And so, as younger advisors are starting more firms, you don't necessarily know what your niche is going to be when you first launch, but you can find it and you can kind of hone it in and hone your messaging as quickly as possible to be sure you're really working with the clients that you want to work with and that you're the right advisor for.
So Alan, like what are two interesting points I think that raises and are worth highlighting? So one, your niche will almost certainly evolve over time. So like the flip side of this is frankly, the number one reason I hear most advisors don't want to focus in on niche basically amounts to, I'm afraid I'm going to pick the wrong one and screw up my business or something.
Very true.
Effect. And so so a few things to highlight on that. First of all, recognize that your niche can and will evolve over time, right? Like Sophia's practice focuses on 80 million people. At some point over time, she's going to narrow that down, either because she'll have to, because eventually more advisors will work with millennials, or because she'll simply find a particular type of clientele that she serves, or a particular type of model, or a particular offering that she really enjoys delivering. And then she'll continue to evolve herself and her business and her offering around that. And that's just the nature of particularly how most of us run advisory businesses. Like it would be one thing if I'm coming out and saying like, okay, I'm running a startup and I want to be $1 billion firm, like $1 billion market cap firm. So now you've actually got to do a lot of analytics about like, who are you focusing on? What is the total addressable market that you're reaching out to? Like, are there enough people and dollars and money there to pay for your product or solution to actually be a big company? Advisors are different, right? Like most advisors I know at the end of the day have a wonderfully successful practice with like 75 to 125 clients. And even then the 80-20 rule usually dominates. And the truth is most advisors can have a great, wonderfully profitable practice with like 30 to 50 of their top A-level clients. That's pretty much all it takes. Maybe you go to 75 because you want to make a bigger business. So in a world where that's all it is, like you need 50 A-level clients out of the, what are we at, 7 billion people on this planet. Like you basically can't go too narrow. You can't get too extreme on this. You just need a problem that's common to 50 people on this planet who have some financial wherewithal to pay you by any means possible that you can come up with a business model to serve them.
It's true.
Like
you can be that specific. I mean, the only niche I have ever come up with that defies that is like, if you only want to work with past U.S. presidents, then you can't come up with 50 of them.
That would be hard. Although, like former world leaders would probably widen you enough.
Widen it just a little bit. You literally, it is next to impossible, to your point, to come up with a niche so narrow that you can't serve 40 to 50 people within that niche. And even then, if you're serving something that specific, if you only worked with previous U.S. presidents, you're going to charge so much money, you don't need 50 of them. You only need 2.
Yeah.
So, the more narrow your niche, that the pricing model will change, which I think brings us around to a point and something that I hear from advisors all the time is advisors ask me, how much should I charge? What should my fee structure be? What kind of services, what extra I know you get this question all the time. What additional designations should I get after the CFP? And the answer always comes back to who do you want to serve? Because the answer to who do you want to serve drives literally every decision in structuring your firm. So if you come in and you say, I want to work with service members, I only want to work with service members, I would say, okay, well, if you're going to charge a monthly subscription fee, I would say base your fee structure on the pay scale of the military, 01, 02, 03. As you kind of climb the officer ranks, your fee schedule should change based on that, because how much income they're getting is solely dependent upon that fee schedule, because it's going to do two things. One, it's going to show your ideal market. It's going to show service members when they come to your website that you understand what they need from you, and that you understand how they make money, because they're going to see the 01, 02, 03. And then other people are going to come to your website. They're not service members, and you go, what the heck is this fee structure? It doesn't make any sense to me. He only works with service members, and they're going to leave. So it's going to, you can literally use your fee structure to repel the wrong type of client and to attract the right type of client. You're going to need to be an expert on the TSP and on pensions for service members. If you don't understand the point system in retirement, you can't work for members of the military. If you don't know what that is, you can't do it. So what additional expertise do you need? You need to go understand all of those pieces. So literally all these decisions around marketing and fee structure and service model and when you meet with your clients and what hours you're going to work and do you do it virtually or in person, all of it depends on who's your ideal client, because that service member versus I want to work with doctors that are transitioning to sell their practice to a hospital in the next 5 years because they're cardiologists, it's going to be such a different business.
Yeah, and that's the key to it, right? And that's how eventually you become differentiated, because the generalist says, come into my office at 3:00 on Thursday, and the specialist says, oh, well, I know given the rotations that they usually do at the hospital, it's probably easiest if I come and meet with you on Saturday morning for 2 hours. I'll just come to the lounge because I know all of the residents will be there and we can go through our stuff. And the specialist knows that. And it's not just, hey, he's working Saturdays. It's he works Saturdays and he takes Thursdays off because he knows that he goes to where his clients are when they need him. And then he doesn't waste time the rest of the time. And just all of those dynamics, where do you meet with them? How do you serve them? What are you doing with them? If you're struggling to answer those questions, you've probably just acknowledged that you are undifferentiated generalist that has no clear target market. Because the more clearly target you are, if you want to know who to serve and what to do, what to do for them and when to meet with them and how to charge them, ask them. Go meet with them and ask them. People come to ask me, how do you design a model for a niche? How do you do it? Find 5 people who would potentially be good in the niche. Ask them out to lunch. Take them out to lunch. Say, I'm thinking about going into creating a niche practice, serving people like you. So I just have some questions. I'm trying to learn about what kinds of challenges people like you face. And, almost everybody likes being asked questions and feels flattered about it. So, you can tell them, since you're very influential, I want to understand more people like you, and ask them what's relevant. What are their issues? What are their challenges? What do they struggle with that they wish someone would help them with? And by the time you take half a dozen people out to lunch and do that, you're going to start getting an impression of what their issues are and what the needs are. And at the end of that lunch, you only ask them 2 questions. The first is, is there anybody else like you that I should be talking to just so I can better understand this market that I want to work with, the people like you, and get introductions, referrals, so you get more people to talk to, not to sell them, just to understand their situation. And then the second thing you ask them is, when I get the skeleton plan version of what this business and service is going to look like, would you mind if I took you out to lunch once more and just showed you what I was working on in the future and asked you to give me a little more feedback? And most people will say yes. And when you go back for that second meeting, you're going to now describe the business. Once again, they're going to help you. They're going to give you constructive criticism and feedback. They're going to help you narrow it. They're going to say, this resonates with me, this doesn't. Hopefully, most of it hits pretty well. And what's going to end up happening? Most of those people are actually going to become your first clients in the niche. Why? Because they just spent 2 lunch meetings with you, basically describing the ideal business that they wish someone would make for people like them. And then you just made it for them.
Advisors, it just occurred to me that this happens to advisors all the time with tech vendors. So, whenever I first started my firm, and still now, I get pitched at least a couple times a week by a new technology company. And they're always asking, hey, I want to talk to you. I want to understand your needs so that I can build the product that you need. And this is the exact process that they go through. And they're so good at it that we could probably learn a lot from their process, because they're going through this saying, hey, What do you need? What's not in the marketplace software wise that you need? Could you help me kind of spec out what are the different pieces that you need? Who are other advisors that I could talk to? The same process Michael just described. And then ultimately they come back with their beta version and say, hey, what do you think? And if I look at it and go, yeah, you just built the software that I said I needed to run my business. Guess what I'm going to buy? I'm going to buy your software,
And, and then there's actually a structure and a process around that. So, a book that I'll recommend, we can put it in the show notes, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries.
Oh, yeah. Great book.
So, not specific to our advisor industry at all, although frankly, I think that's good because to me, a lot of the best ideas actually come from outside of our industry and not inside. So the whole idea of this book, it provides a structure to how this is done, how you reach out into a marketplace to try to learn about it, understand it, develop a product or service for them. There's a big focus on what's called the MVP, minimum viable product, of what's the minimum you think you need to create to actually have something that is valuable and meaningful for the people that you're trying to serve so that you can begin to sell it to them. You're just trying to get to something that's good enough that some people in that niche will pay something. And then you're just going to continue to iterate and build on your service model from there. Hey, we do this, but we've been working with the people more, and a lot of them are telling us they need this other thing as well. So we're going to add that in as well. And even that's how we've been building XYPN Network as well, right? Like we started with sort of a core offering that we originally went to market with. What did we hear back from lots of our members and prospective members? This whole process of getting started on the firm just freaks me out because I don't know what to do with the actual process of how you launch an RIA and all the paperwork and stuff like that freaks me out. So we heard that so many times, we added in a piece that says, we'll do all of your compliance for you as a part of the membership offering. And it was nothing like we didn't have this magical stroke of genius of trying to mastermind what everybody wants. We went out to something that was viable to a core membership. We got our initial members. We listened to what they wanted, what more prospective members were saying they wanted. And then we added that in as a new service. And now the business continues to evolve into that niche based on that service. And obviously I'm kind of passionate around building niche businesses, but that's what I've done for all the different businesses that I built. Our new planner recruiting business went that way, and XYPN Network went that way. And the personal brand site platform I built, Kitsis.com, has gone that way. Like the more you're focused on a particular audience, the easier it actually is to figure out how to evolve your model. Because all you have to do is listen to what all the people are telling you they want. And when you know who you're serving, you know exactly who to listen to. It's them, and you know what to give them, what they ask for. And the whole process gets a lot easier.
It's important to emphasize, though, that you can do this as a startup, and pivoting as a startup is so much easier than an existing firm. And I recognize that. I was just talking with an advisor inside of a billion-dollar firm, and he said every decision here takes a year to implement. Now, inside of a startup, it takes about 36 hours to implement a new idea, because that's just as long as it takes. But what we're talking about doing and addressing, really understanding a niche market, defining who you want to work with, designing the business model, kind of this lean startup mentality. You can do this as a new firm. You can do this inside of an existing firm. Just because you have a firm with 50 or 100 clients that are kind of broad-based doesn't mean you can't start to define your niche. And truth be told, when you have 100 clients, you probably can look at your client base and really identify who do you really want to work with and start to develop a niche out of that. That's okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we've been talking about this in the context of new firms coming to market, target your niche, get your minimum viable product, off you go, and you iterate from there. But it's a good point that when you talk about firms that are existing firms, frankly, I think in many ways the process is easier. If you look at most practices, the 80-20 rule kind of holds. So, 20% of your clients are really driving the majority of the profitability and the success of the business. So start there first and see, are there any niches and any commonalities to these people? Now, hint, commonality is not they all have at least $1 million. This
asset level is not a niche. Maybe we should have started this show with that.
Asset level is not a niche. What are their problems? What are their pain points? What are their issues? Do you have a bunch of doctors? Could you do that to get deeper into doctors or a particular kind of practice or people in your area? I know a couple of firms out there that specialize in doctors. I mean, the ones that really do it well, I mean, they're in there at a whole other level. Like, when you talk about what's their specialized service offering, includes things like, we actually give you practice management advice on how to run a medical practice. So like, we'll look at your records. We'll look at the software that you use to run your medical practice. We'll give you advice about whether your operations manager, which is so core for most medical practices, is actually doing a decent job. If you need to fire him or her, we'll help you with the hiring process to replace the person. Now, you notice we haven't yet talked at all about like, where's your 401k and IRA invested, but that's the point. It's such a focused niche practice that person is so deep into the things that actually matter to a doctor running a medical practice that the rest of the stuff is just kind of minor. It comes later, because if you help them with that and you figure out how to take their medical practice from running a $100,000 a year profit to a $400,000 a year profit, you've added, frankly, way more value than most other financial planners do in their respective areas. And guess what? Now that person's going to have oodles of income in dollars to invest with you and buy your products or pay for your services or whatever else you've got. But like it starts with them.
So let's be honest, and I can imagine that listeners are thinking, yeah, we know doctors are a great niche. Every other advisor out there knows that. So it might be kind of cool just to talk about some of the cool niche markets that we know of advisors either having talked about serving or actually are out there serving, because it may help. There's another great book called The Blue Ocean Strategy. And the concept behind it is that there's red oceans where basically there's blood in the water, that there's so much market competition. The sharks are just ripping at each other. And essentially, whenever you get into a red ocean, you end up competing on price. I mean, that's essentially what ends up happening. Eventually, it becomes commoditized. And in a blue ocean, it's this wide open marketplace where there's really no competition. No one's really interested in serving your clients. So, one of those might be that those advisors that are serving service members. There's not a lot of advisors that are really interested in serving service members because they just don't have a lot of assets, so they don't think about it, even though they have really specialized, unique needs. They have great pensions. They've got the TSP, so they're saving. They're moving around every 2 years. Many times they have rental properties that, I've had service members, and my father is a service member. So, you could end up with rental properties in 8 different states because you just bought a house every time you moved. And so you end up with these really unique situations that you can be the advisor specialized in. That's a wide open blue ocean.
Yeah, I mean, it like there's almost no end, no limit to how many different directions you can go. I mean, I know people that specialize around subject matter areas. So, there's sort of broad-based ones like Social Security specialists. There's 10,000 baby boomers a day turning full retirement age for the next 15 years or so. So like, you want an easy slam dunk niche specialization, you can go with the subject matter like that. You can focus on IRA rollovers. There are a bunch of people there. Sadly, even those are kind of differentiated given how broad most advisors are. You can go to a particular clientele. So I've seen people that do service members. I've seen people that do executives. I've seen people that do executives in one industry. I've seen people who do executives at one company where they know the stock options and the employee benefits and this deferred comp and all of that stuff cold. So they don't have to do a bunch of research. When a new client comes in, they just know all of it cold right out of the gate and can help in that area. I've seen people specialize with almost every possible professional services area, specializing in lawyers, specializing in accountants. I saw one guy that specialized in architects because he'd kind of gotten into that world and had a bunch of architects in his family that introduced him around to get started. There's a guy out there whose niche is bass fishermen because he grew up on a lake and was involved in bass fishing tournaments and then got active in that community as a financial advisor. And I didn't know until I'd read about it, but apparently like bass fishing has $1 million prize purses. So there's big money that moves around plus huge endorsement deals. And like, that's his niche. You win a big prize. You want to know what to do. You call him up and he tells you what to do because he's the guy in the bass fishing community.
And to your point, I mean, we could go on for days about just ideas of niche markets. I mean, new parents, divorcing couples, same-sex couples that live together and aren't married. I mean,
well, and that's the point, right? Like you need anything that fits like 50 to 75 clients who have the wherewithal to pay. And we're trying to carve up 350 million people in the US or more, because you could do, hey, expats in other countries or like whatever else. The world's your oyster. So yeah, like the list never ends because you can be so narrow and have it be so successful as an advisor. Like basically they need some kind of common problem and they need some financial wherewithal to pay somehow. I mean, if you want to work with people who have negative debt and no income and are homeless, like this might get a little bit difficult because they're just maybe a limited wherewithal to pay. But you want to work with entrepreneurs. I wouldn't run an AUM model. They plow all their money back into their businesses, but you can charge them a $10,000 a year retainer. And if you give great value, they won't think twice about that. They're driven business owners that can understand the value of reinvesting into businesses in themselves. You want to work with teachers, you're going to need a different price point. You can't charge them 10 grand because the math just won't work for them. You want to work with retirees, you can do asset under management because they have assets that they're rolling over. You want to work with executives at a company where most of their money is tied up in stock options. That may not work so well. So you're going to have to structure it differently. So you can match the model to whoever it is. You want to reach young people that don't have assets and live on cash flow, charge them on a monthly retainer model because they're used to paying for everything from cash flow. So match the business model, match the pricing model to the people that you want to work with.
So we've really hit on, and we focus most of this episode on, having a differentiated business model. And it starts with being willing to say who you want to work with. And by say, I mean to yourself, be willing to say, I really want to serve these clients. Design the business around that. Every facet of pricing and structure and service model, all of that will be based on who's your niche market. And then the final piece is go out and tell people who you serve. Nothing is more frustrating to me than when I talk to an advisor that's one of these, like Michael talks about with physicians, that specializes in working with physicians and has this really great, compelling story to tell and has the right, business model and all this stuff and deep expertise. And you go to the website and it's this, I serve individuals and families. And it's like, no, just tell people what you're doing.
Yeah, it's painful for me. Like a lot of people I know out there that even actually are specialized. If you got referred to them and you went to their website, you wouldn't know that they specialize in that. And like, even if they're getting known in their niche, when the people in their niche come to their website actually repels the people you wanted to work with the most because you didn't even effectively communicate to the people who found you and are in your niche. And like that's the problem with it. Like, we get so desperate for clients, we think we have to cast the widest net possible. And the problem is the net that you stretch out doesn't actually catch very many fish. It slips through it. And of course, the irony is most advisors don't even track how much traffic comes to their website. They don't track how many people submit inquiries off the website so that they can calculate a conversion rate. So they don't even realize how big the gaps are in the net that they're casting. They just feel like they're not getting many clients. And if you looked and went and realized that 0.01% of your website traffic ever contacts you to do business, maybe you might want to fix that number. And how do you fix that number? You make it more targeted so at least it resonates with someone. Because you know what? If 1% of all the people who visited your website contact you about becoming clients, you would have more business than you could deal with.
And I think ultimately, we kind of have two issues going on kind of as we're wrapping up this episode. I think we have two issues. One being there's really not enough advisors. I think that I'm a big believer in supply and demand. And I truly believe that we just don't have enough advisors that we haven't been forced to do this yet. And I think that the second piece is that's changing. So
that's what the crisis of differentiation is. I think that we at least have enough advisors all concentrating in the same subset of affluent, higher net worth folks, because that's where everybody is gravitated, that space actually is getting crowded now.
It has finally started to become a red ocean, and it hasn't been for a long, long time. We've been able to just kind of hang your shingle out and get a few clients, and eventually clients will refer clients, and you built a little business and you didn't have to worry about it. If you're starting a business or you're looking to take your business to the next level, it's not quite the same conversation anymore that it was 10 years ago. And it can be a little interesting when you talk to advisors that built their business, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they just say, oh yeah, just, go out there and your clients will refer you new clients. It really was that easy.
Like, that doesn't work as well anymore.
And those dreaded robo-advisors, I think that ultimately they're going to start forcing some additional conversations around pricing. I think that suddenly, if your differentiation model is, well, we do really fancy asset allocations using Vanguard ETFs, suddenly that's not going to be much of a differentiator anymore. And so, I think that technology, robo-advisors, just the internet in general, just access to information that now clients are able to research and understand what you do, expectations, particularly from younger generations on how they're going to interact with their advisors and using social media channels and all this, in addition to the fact that we are finally growing the ranks of CFPs. All of that is kind of hitting at once. And I'm afraid that this is one of those situations with a horrible, the frog in the boiling water metaphor, that we're just kind of all sitting around waiting for something to happen. And there's going to come a moment where we all go, oops. Wish I had listened to Alan and Michael back in 2015 whenever they said I needed a niche, because I don't know if it's going to be January 2016 or January 2022, but eventually it's going to be too late if you're not making moves now.
Yeah, I have to admit, I notwithstanding how, I guess, overused it is, like the frog boiling over in the pot of water metaphor is, I think, actually a really good one right now, that, just the competitive landscape and the challenge of differentiation have moved so slowly on us that most advisors just don't realize it. And frankly, I think there's a dynamic. A lot of advisors have probably grown large enough practices that they're reasonably sufficient from the client base they've got. So maybe they're not that focused on growth. So they don't really get much growth, but they're not really stressing about it much because they didn't have that much anyways. And they've just kind of accepted the reality and the environment that we're in. But it's hard for growth-minded advisors. I think it's essential for new advisors that are getting, or people who are starting a new practice, whether or not you're actually a new advisor, that this focus, like this niche imperative framework is really going to become that. It's going to become an imperative soon. And that's the changing landscape for where we are right now. And I do fear, I think a lot of advisors just haven't acknowledged it or realized it or accepted it or owned up to it. But that's the environment that we're in.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it is one of those things people are going to really wish at some point that they had made these moves. And so I hope that any advisors that are listening, that you just take a look at your business, take a look at your business model, at the business structure you're looking at building or what you've already built, and just ask yourself, what makes you different? Are you different? If not, that's step one. We got to make you different and pick a client profile and an ideal kind of client avatar that you really want to focus on. And then the next step is, are you telling people that you're different? Are you actually out there sharing content and getting quoted in the right publications or writing guest articles for, niche publications around your, ideal client profile? Does your website say who you want to serve? Do your centers of influence know that's who you want to serve? Do the centers of, do the referrers out there know that you're that person? So, well, this has been a ton of fun. This is a little different format for XYPN Radio, but let us know what you think in our VIP community where you can submit comments. You can go to xyplannetwork.com/VIP to join our free community with our private Facebook group. So, Michael, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was a ton of fun.
My pleasure. Hope it's been food for thought for everyone.
Oh man, that episode was a ton of fun. A little different format. So you'll have to let me know what you think about us co-hosting on topics like this instead of just me strictly interviewing planners and other guests. So I know the word niche gets thrown around quite a bit. So I hope this episode helps define what we mean when we encourage you to develop a niche and really focus your practice. You can check out all the resources that we mentioned today at xyplannetwork.com/11. And just as a reminder, if you ever want to ask Michael or I questions, a great way to do that is to sign up for our free VIP community at xyplannetwork.com/VIP. If you're on the road, you can also text XYPN Radio to 33444. That's one word, XYPN Radio, and that will also get you access to our VIP community. Now, all of this month's episodes are brought to you by New Planner Recruiting, the leading recruiting firm for financial planners nationwide. New Planner Recruiting offers many resources to coach and support Gen Y planners as they launch into the profession. Firms nationwide partner with New Planner Recruiting to source, screen, and integrate the perfect fit for their needs. Led by passionate and experienced financial planners, New Planner Recruiting has a refined, dedicated, and personalized plan to help both candidates and firms position themselves for success. I actually worked with New Planner Recruiting when I graduated college back in 2010 and was really impressed by the process they use to not only evaluate and place young planners, but to place them with the right firm for them. So be sure to check them out at newplannerrecruiting.com and also listen to the episode that we had with their co-founder and CEO, Caleb Brown, at xyplannetwork.com/9. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningNetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.